support Motown. You will never be the same.
And with the full catastrophe, he didn't mean it was all bad.
God that I worship has a way of saying, don't play with me.
I invite you to the dance with the Lord of the dance.
God didn't call America to do what she's doing in the world now.
Please dance.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Remote Pastoral Care. We have a really fun episode, I hope, in front of us today. We've got definitely a whole different panel worth of people today. As always, I'm Pastor Don, who is moderating this conversation and by far the craziest person present. Joining us as well, we have Steve, who you may remember from a couple of videos ago. He's been around a few times. Say hi, Steve.
Hello. Already waved. It was one step ahead of you.
I know. It was a nice jaunty wave. I quite liked it. And then we are joined by two new faces who are here as well. We've got Audra and Kate. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves as well?
Sure, I guess I'll take that lead. My name is Audra. I actually grew up with Don in our hometown, including occasionally going to church with him. Know his family, they're great people, love them very much. I actually live not even 2 blocks from the house he was raised in, which is very funny. I have a Bachelor of Science in Biology with a minor in specialty program in alcohol and drug addiction studies. And I have worked in the mental health care field for 5 years and recently got out of that due to a back injury and now work for a federal agency that does none of those things because I can't afford to go to grad school and it's expensive.
All right, Kate, you want to let us know who you are?
My name is Kate, and I go to Rutgers University and I'm studying psychology. I'm a non-traditional student, and I met Don in New Jersey.
Yep. All right. And let's see. So we got everybody here. I'm going to give a warning to anybody who's watching. There may be the occasional elliptical sort of cross-dissolve edits here because I am on kid duty today because of the pandemic. So if I get interrupted, I'm going to definitely cut that out because my kids are not coming on the program today. So with that in mind, you guys, got some loud trucks going on outside. Do you guys want to give us our discussion for today? You want to lead us off?
No, why don't you do that?
Well, the whole point is y'all are supposed to ask me questions. So you tee them up, I'll knock them off. It's like pastoral t-ball.
Okay, well, I guess we'll do it like we kind of did before we started recording, which is what does the Bible say about abortion?
It says absolutely nothing. Next question.
What does the Bible say about pregnancy?
Not much, at least not in the way you may be thinking. The only real case in which the Bible gets into any kind of detail about fetal life, which is I think really the bit that you're thinking about, is in my scriptural recall sucks, but I want to say it's in some of the codes in Exodus where it starts talking about the penalties for various offenses. And that's where it details like the penalty for murder, the penalty for this, that, and the other thing, the penalty for murder, of course, being death, because come on, we're talking about 3,000+ years ago, ancient Israelites. Of course it was death. But where that gets interesting is in that same passage or that same area, we get the only real reference to judicial penalties for assault on a woman resulting in the death of an unborn child. And in that case, it is a fine as determined by her husband. Patriarchal implications of ancient Israel aside, that is a clear definition, even in the hyper-conservative Old Testament legal code, which again, doesn't apply to modern Christians. But even there, it's definitely separating a clear difference between a fetus and a live human being. So but that's the only place it really comes up. So there's not much more to go on beyond that. I mean, then we could get into other things like the arguments over, the arguments that are best summed up by the Monty Python chorus singing "Every sperm is sacred." and all the old Catholic doctrine therein.
Now, I'm not going to speak much about abortion, being that I'm not a woman, but I did want to extend off that question. Is there anything in those codes? I mean, obviously we shouldn't spend too much time on them, but in those codes about accidental loss of life?
With respect to fetal life, it's really just the one passage.
Yeah, but more accidental loss of like human life, like outside the womb. Is there anything in there? I mean, I don't pay much attention to it. I just want to have that for comparison.
Yeah. I imagine that there is, but short of taking 5 minutes of dead air time to Google it, I honestly don't know off the top of my head. This may surprise you, but despite my Princeton seminary degree and years of experience as a pastor, I don't have all of the legal codes of the Old Testament memorized.
That's
Come
fair.
on.
I know, right? But to the best of my knowledge, there may be something in there about accidental death, but it's a minor footnote, if that. And again, Old
Basically,
Testament.
the takeaway is short of murder, the penalty is not death.
Exactly. Short of deliberate murder of an active living human, the penalty is variable. But that's generally my understanding. And I put that out there full in the understanding that there are people who are much better scholars on Old Testament legalism than I am, and maybe hopping eagerly into the comments to tell me how wrong I am. But that's to the best of my knowledge anyway. But
What about life? What does the Bible say anything about when life starts?
the Bible does not say much on when life starts unless you start doing what we call eisegesis. Anyone know that term?
Sounds familiar. No, exegesis sounds familiar.
We know exegesis, which is a term that means to read out from the scripture. So you're looking at the scripture and trying to flush out what it actually says. Eisegesis.
Own beliefs on the scripture.
Exactly. That's reading into the scripture. That's when you're looking at the scripture and saying, how does this reinforce what I'm coming to the table already expecting to believe?
Confirming bias.
Which you may recognize as a very, very common technique of regular people reading the Bible these days. Now, if you go to the table expecting there to be something in the Bible that give you clear definitions for exactly what modern marriage is supposed to be, clear definitions for when life begins, all of that, you're gonna find something that reinforces your belief because that's exactly what you're doing. Some of the best examples of that, my own personal favorite example of that, are you all familiar with the story of Onan?
No.
No.
The story
off the top
of
of my head.
Onan is the one that is at the root of that whole every sperm is sacred argument. So Onan was a guy, obviously, who had a brother, and his brother had a wife, and his brother came down with a serious case of the dead. And according to the tradition of the time, in the event that your brother came down with a serious case of the dead while being married and had not yet produced a male heir, well, it was your responsibility to strap up and provide that heir as the next best thing. Because, sperm banks weren't a thing back in, ancient Israel. So, Onan was like, all right, I kind of got a thing for my bro's wife. This seems like the best opportunity I'm ever going to get. And he does his business. He goes to town. And at the end of the happy event, he pulls out and opens fire on a local anthill. At which point God says, oh, we have none of that, and strikes Onan dead. Now, reading that eisegetically, you can say, oh, wow, God really wants us to make sure that all of our sperm are put exactly where they belong. And therefore, life begins at ejaculation, which has been the Catholic position for a surprisingly long time.
Regulate it through the women.
Yeah, yes, of course. However, if you read the story to see what it's actually saying, it's saying rape by fraud is a bad thing. And so that particular story—
Is there any other kind of rape?
No, forcible rape. I mean, you're not pretending to be anything other than a violent criminal in that case.
Rape is rape. Rape by fraud is just
Yeah, it's a methodological distinction, not a reducing in category.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
It's basically the man said, I want this woman, so I'm gonna
Yeah, lie
make
to
it look longer, basically, to reduce an error.
Yeah, and nowadays, I mean, that's a thing that still happens. What's the term? I have been married for quite a long time, so I'm not familiar with all the terms you young as you. What was it called? Like stealthing or something like that?
no clue what young people call it, but
Yeah, it's basically the dude whipping the condom off mid-act.
I mean, no, we're the same age.
Yeah,
considering that most rapes are actually permitted or performed by somebody that the victim knows,
mm-hmm.
you know, like that's where you get acquaintance rape, spousal rape, things like
Yeah.
that. The majority of rape is committed by somebody that the victim knows.
Yeah.
They're, you know, rape is rape.
Yeah, and exactly. And I mean, the broadest definition of rape is a violation of the bounds of sexual consent. In the case of Onan, he had consent of the woman up to a point, but the point was this is for cultural purposes to create a male heir to continue the family line. It ain't for you. And the minute he crossed those bounds, he had violated the bounds of consent. So that story is actually a big piece about respecting and honoring the bounds of consent. But because of this eisegetical approach that we'd like to take with our scriptures sometimes, it's often used for something very different.
Now, where does that story appear?
Oh God, it's early days. And again, you're talking to the pastor who's got probably the worst scriptural recall as for stuff like that.
That actually is a biblical story.
Yes.
And the biblical story
Now
located
that
in-
you repeated it, it sounds familiar.
yeah,
I
Genesis chapter 38.
At all. That's, what'd you say? Repeat.
Genesis 38. So it is early days.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with it at all. That's good to know, and it's good to know the actual meaning.
Yeah.
I must have spaced out during catechism during Genesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is a lot of Christian instruction tends to skip the back half of Genesis, and there is some weird shit there.
Seems like they're really only focusing on how the earth was created in original sin and not so much on the rest.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, they always focus on how the earth was definitely created in 7 or 6 real-time days that were exactly 24 hours in length and happened exactly 6,400 years ago, which is not what the Bible says, again.
Exactly. I was going to say that's two completely different Genesis stories were stuck together into one.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got this backlog of the idea of even time frames from when
Yeah.
it was now.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that has always thrown me off. Once again,
Yeah.
setting up for next week's differences between science and faith, but also how they can go together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I never got where people would get that adding up the numbers and all of the begats actually mattered.
I didn't get that either until I had kids. So earlier this week, I'm talking with my daughter, and we're doing a thing, and she's allowed to have a snack. And I say, look, if you behave and if you do well, you got to clean up your room here real quick. And if you do that, I'll let you have some potato chips. But if you don't, well, then I might not let you have potato chips. And she stops for a minute, looks me dead in the eyes and goes, precisely how many potato chips are you going to allow me to have? And I'm like, hold the phone. Do you really think that that level of detail is something that A, matters, or B, I ever bothered to consider at all? And then I look back at the way people have been dealing with the Bible forever. And I'm like, they're doing the exact same thing. Like all of this, it must be exactly 6,400 years based on this particular begat. That's like, how many potato chips are you giving me, God? It's like, you don't need to know that. It's not relevant. It's not even what the story's about.
Claire wants to know the value of her labor.
Exactly.
Smart girl.
Also wants to know whether or not it's different compared to her or any of her siblings.
Mm-hmm. There's a big oldest child energy right there, which I of course know nothing about.
Oh, she'll percentage it out over time and realize if there's a pay gap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she will figure it out. She don't know already.
Exactly.
But that's
Perpetuating the gender gap.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the mentality, though, that gets a lot of this eisegetical stuff, is this desire to plumb the Bible for these sorts of meticulous, scientific, super hyper literal truths, when the Bible's never meant to be about that. It was never meant to be. And this is something they tell you from day one of seminary. The Bible is not a history textbook. It's not a science textbook. It's not meant to communicate that kind of information in that way.
It's a play.
Sorry?
It's a play.
I wouldn't go quite that far to say it's a play, but it is definitely meant to be a morally instructive narrative.
Yeah, I read a couple books that have related to some of the stories as if they were plays.
Yeah, and that is a reasonable framework, I think, to understand it. I wouldn't go so far as to say they're entirely fictional in the way you would describe a play, but they're not entirely historical either.
I would say they're more parables. They're something that may be rooted in fact, but are fleshed out.
Yeah.
And by man, because obviously they couldn't read and write at the time, nor were they taken seriously enough to be able to write divine books.
Yeah.
But then on top of it, you've got this aspect of thousands of years of translating and transcribing, and how that is influenced by the person or people doing it. And then you come to now where you've got all of these assumptions or things being preached that really never appeared. And even though we have a separation of church and state in this country, it really does not feel like it at all.
Yeah,
and
that's fair.
It, especially when it comes to, unfortunately, being a woman of all kinds. Because even when you look at how, because it's Pride Month. Okay, let's start with that. It is Pride Month, and this is fantastic time for us to celebrate the idea that science has it right, and people who tend to be devoutly Christian and look at things a certain way and have been trained to and conditioned to look at things a certain way are wrong. They get a rudimentary idea of what biology is based on high school, and they never get that fleshed out. Oh, you've got 2 chromosomes, you're either a female or you're a male. You are either gay or you are straight. There is no spectrum. That is it. That's what you get from Christianity most of the time. And
without I don't want to step on you too much here, but without I do want to take a little bit of an issue with assigning that belief system to devout Christians, because this idea of a male-female binary isn't biblical. And if you're being truly devout, then you can't take it that way.
Exactly. But a lot of people consider themselves that way and keep pushing this idea. And it's the same kind of feeling over and over and over again. It's like, oh, you're born female, therefore you no longer have bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
Even if everybody else has it. Or you are maybe intersex, or you are maybe trans, or you are maybe non-binary, or all of these other things, but to them it doesn't exist, even though there's perfect scientific evidence to back it up. And this idea of abortion, that somehow in order for it to be okay, which is what we're seeing now in like 26 states in the country, that in order for it to even be considered okay, is that it has to be from rape or incest, which means someone has to ruin someone else's bodily autonomy first before she can make a decision for herself over what to do about it.
Yeah. And well, as a cishet white male who's not living in the United States, I can't speak over much to the political situation of it. What I can say is that that approach isn't remotely biblical and isn't remotely Christian. Like it has nothing to do with who we are as followers of Jesus Christ. It's just flagrantly not there. In fact, and well, I'm sure we got a later episode where we're going to talk about this in much greater detail. I'm sure we'll get into it more there. The Bible is generally supportive of everything from women's rights to acknowledgement of LGBTQ individuals. Hell, there's one situation wherein Jesus encounters what we would modernly consider to be a gay man, and the only thing he says about it is, "Your faith is the best." So
That's awesome.
you'd think if he had a particular perspective on it, he might have said something other than that in that situation, but it didn't happen.
Exactly. I guess the reason that I bring it up is because I've heard a lot of people, especially a lot of my pregnant friends,
Mhm.
during Pride Month being especially rude to the idea of trans people having children, and how that this country really just is still really upset about that. But they're not even upset about the fact that we have the worst maternal healthcare rate in 11 developed countries. We're the bottom. Like, they don't seem to care that we have the same amount of miscarriages that we have abortions. And those are just the ones that are recorded. They're looking at all the wrong aspects of how do we treat this? How do we prevent it? How do we educate? How do we do this stuff? And instead they're just passing like blatantly wrong laws and using Christianity as some sort of means to get people to support these types of beliefs when it doesn't seem like there's much evidence for that. So how does that happen? How do we get a ton of congregations and people who believe that abortion is wrong, that gay people are wrong, that being trans is wrong, that, all of these different things, but then turn around and also say, oh, well, if someone rapes a child and that child gets pregnant, that person goes away for, if they're prosecuted, if, that's a big if, they go away for 7 years. Meanwhile, that girl, like in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
she has an abortion. She has to, number one, leave the state to do it. How? Because chances are the person who knocked her up is, related to her. Then you've got the aspect of the fact that now this new law indicates that anybody who helps her can be fined. Like, you've got all of these different aspects going on in the United States right now, and they are all trying to back it up with the idea of, oh, well, God knows you before you are even conceived.
Thank you, misreadings of Jeremiah.
Exactly. Abortion is murder. Like, we've got this entire aspect in this country right now that is really all coming through in the really hardcore in the last couple of months, and it's difficult to ignore.
Yeah. Now, I can't speak to why people are doing things for political reasons, so I certainly have my guesses. I can say historically that, you talk about why are they doing this to women? Why are they doing this to LGBTQ individuals? Why are they the bad guy? Why are these guys the bad guy? You may as well just ask, why does Christianity consider Black people the bad guy? Why did Christianity consider Jews the bad guy? Like, at any stage in history, it's always been a different bad guy. And it's always been, we need to construct a reason for these people to be the bad guys, because if we don't have a bad guy, we don't have a system of control. Christianity, for all of the good that our faith does and all of the wonders of our God, as an organized religion, we are very, very susceptible, the way we built this thing up, to being used as an instrument for control. And in all of these instances, these deliberate misreadings, they're all built around creating an out-group for the in-group to hate. That's the end goal there, because when you have that dichotomy set up, it's really, really easy to control a community. And so many people get into the business of religious leadership, not because they have an interest in following the scriptures or knowing Jesus or helping people. They get into it because they want to control a community. It's politicians for people who can't stand politics.
But isn't abortion a step too far, though, because it makes the outgroup women, which is like not a minority?
Well, consider the people who are doing the control. Usually in these environments, they're straight men. And can you think of, off the top of your head, a reason why straight men might want to exhibit mental or social control over women as a group?
There's lots of reasons. Yeah, we know that. So
Mhm.
I think it would be nice for the men to actually explain why straight men, especially straight white men, feel the
Well,
need to control women, because it coming from women, when we say it,
mhm.
it's for being hysterical.
Yeah. Well, as the only straight white guy here in the conversation, I guess that's directed to me. um, Unless Steve, you got any insights on this, but I would say honestly,
I've been single for years, Don. No, I have no information to add to this.
you know, the wanting to control women aspect, I'm not going to generalize and say that it's present in every guy, but a lot of us have it, and it stems from psychologically. If you can control women, you can control whether or not you get rejected, and you have your pick of the litter. It's that kind of hindbrain sort of thinking. And I don't know that most men would even be able to consciously express it in such terms. Most men are just like, I want to do the thing, and they're lucky if they can even get it to that point. But yeah, for a lot of men, that desire to control women is almost animalistic or almost primal. It's just a desire to possess that is being read itself out in more and more progressively complicated ways. It's the modern evolution of ugh, crack, get in head with club and drag back to cave.
That's the way I view it, but I'm glad somebody else said it.
Yeah, you can't really deny that. It's largely, I think, rooted in that. And I think we all have our kind of pre-built, uncivilized, and kind of inherent cruelties, the bits of ourself that are in Christian terms, we'd say our sinful natures, that we have to be aware of and work past. For straight men, that's the big one, is the desire to seize and control and to take. Doubly so if you're white, because come on, triply so if you're British or American. So, we all got it going for us hard. But that desire to seize and to control and to take and to possess what you want, rather than to earn or converse for or enter into partnership with or for what you want. It's something you have to fight against and be aware of and work through. And historically, straight white men have been terrible at doing that. And that gets us to a lot of what we got right now.
I still think politically, because there's votes behind it, the only way it works, even though straight men have straight men, white men have the power to enact these things, the only way it works and the only way you get a whole bunch of people voting or supporting these ideas when women are the majority, there are more women than men, is by making this cult of emotion as well about the babies.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I was going to bring up, is it's not just men preaching to women that we shouldn't be doing this. It's also over generations now. In this country, for as long as it has existed, which is before it has existed, since 1652, we've had laws about abortion. And so we've got like almost 400 years here of conditioning of women to say, oh, no, honey, you can't do that. It's taking your child, it's taking your life. It's all of this stuff. It's terrible, it's bad, and here's why. And a lot of times this stuff does also relate to, or they try to make it seem like it relates to faith. And
it's to me, it's just gotten to a disgusting level. I mean, not only for bodily autonomy, but it's gotten to a disgusting level with what these people do when they go to like protesting at a Planned Parenthood, for example, where all of its other services and what little tiny fraction of it goes to actually providing abortions. It's just, to use the best pun I think I can make here, it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, more literally apt than one might think. But
so to me, it's, and I can say this as a man, to me, it's still just disgusting.
Yeah. And that's one that I can't say I've ever fully understood either in this mindset, is this, even if even if you make the concession that abortion is murder, which again, you know I won't, but even if you do, and you're a Christian, and I don't really have a good answer to this, how you personally make the jump from I believe this to I'm going to enact violence and psychological and mental harm on other people. Because that is something that is 100% for no reason justifiable under Christian theology and schools of thought. It's not there. We literally have Jesus Christ on record saying things like, turn the other cheek, you moron. The you moron is, of course, an addition of my own, which I think is necessary in the modern age, but I believe you do get the point. There is nothing I can find anywhere in my studies of the Bible that gives the slightest justification for a Christian deciding this is my firmly held religious position and then immediately shooting someone in the face because they disagree. It's just not there. And I even can't grasp how people can make that jump.
Yeah, or dwelling.
Quite often I've heard, well, not personally heard, but how people make jumps like that by using the Israelites having to take over Canaan and were told to kill all the people that were there. Because they were not chosen. They were the unbelievers. They were the evil.
And that's one that's always blown me away too, is because that isn't what happened in that story. What happened is that God said, here is the land of Canaan, it is yours to go into and settle and milk and honey and all that stuff. And then the Israelites were like, sweet, we're gonna kill everybody. And the differentiation between who made the call as to what is huge in understanding the Bible. God said, go and live there. And the humans said, okay, we're gonna kill everyone who's already there first so we can live there all on our own. And you can almost imagine God being just like, wait, what?
There are some instances, like the time where King Saul was told to kill all the Ammonites, I think. I don't remember who. And he disobeyed by not killing everything and everyone and everything. And he said, save the best animals to sacrifice and then that story.
Without digging into that one super exegetically, which I admit I'm not prepared for at the moment, I will say I have preached on that one before too. First off, have you ever heard of the literary technique called the unreliable narrator?
No.
It's basically where the person telling the story can't be relied on to give correct facts. When you're talking about King Saul, he's telling his own story there. So he's an unreliable narrator of his own story. Like he said, God told me to kill all the Ammonites. Well, we only have Saul's word for it, and he definitely benefited from doing that.
Gotcha.
So that is a piece of it as well that has to be considered when reading it. Also,
it's almost like a modern day of what's going on. God told us to do this when God said nothing of the sort. So we're going to enact a bunch of shitty laws.
Which is why it's worth noting that Old Testament stories and stuff like that are meant to be instructive in the sense that they're meant to show us things that happened and how people dealt with them and how the mindsets involved have operated. And they're not meant to be directive in that they're telling you that you can and should behave in a certain way. Saul in particular is an example, Saul and Solomon, honestly, and to a certain extent, really all of them, but we'll take Saul and Solomon as the good examples. These are guys who were your ultimate manly men who became king, had all the money, all the women, who built the empire and did all the things. And the assumption when we're reading that today is to say, okay, this man was king. He was the head of the society. He had won. This is capitalism's endgame right here. It's the guy who had all the things, and this was the guy. So therefore, he must be right. But the lesson of the Bible is he wasn't. And Solomon is that times a million, by the way. This is a guy who has literally become the name for wisdom and spiritual awesomeness in our lexicon. But if you actually read the damn Bible, like he breaks every rule that God set for him. And in the end, it results in the complete destruction of his kingdom. So Yeah, a lot of these stories will have stuff like that, but they're not meant to be indications that these are good paths to take. They're meant to be, hey, look at what the people did, and oh God, that was not a good idea.
Yep.
But
Many people don't realize that. That's why they still use stuff like that to jump to conclusions.
yeah, and there are two types of people. There's people who use that, as you say, to just jump to their own conclusions. And then there are the people who realize that you can do that and take to the pulpit and jump to those conclusions as a means of building a group and a community around them to give themselves power and control. I look to the evangelicals and the megachurches as perhaps the best examples of this, as people who know full well, if I get up in a pulpit and I say, there's my enemy, let's get them, then people will rally around me because everybody loves a good fight. And whether them's the gays or whether them's the women or whether them's name you any group here, it really doesn't matter because you've seen the same type of person throughout history doing the exact same thing. It's depressing.
I guess to go off the fact that it is depressing, the best question now is like, what can we do? And we all have different backgrounds here, but what can we do? These people are basically brainwashed at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the question I've discussed with you many times, how to deal with the willful ignorant, because I don't like playing with kid gloves with them because it just infuriates me. And I'm sure the ladies in this chat have the same experience.
That's why I kind of went off the deep end immediately and bringing in LGBTQIA plus rights as well is your brain immediately starts this flood of I freaking hate all of this. Like the idea that every single thing that someone is saying right now, number one, is wrong and they think it's justified.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So to your question, Steve, what do we do now? I'm never, as much as I may want to sometimes, I'm never going to be the guy who claims to have definitive answers to questions like that. But I remember some advice I got from a colleague of mine some years ago who had built up this really impressive church institution. But when he'd gotten there in years past, it was this tiny little church of maybe a dozen old people. And I asked him, how in the hell did you build this massive liberal bastion of justice and rights and work that's like huge, bordering on a mega church in its size at times, but doing all the right things? How did you do that out of a congregation of olds? And he said, really, I just started doing the right thing. And some of the people went with me and some of them left. And more people came because people will navigate to and congregate to people who are doing the right thing in the course of time. And what was unique to me in that situation, he said, is that I tried to keep in touch with the people who had left, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But peer pressure is a hell of a drug. And as they started to see that the community was gathering around doing the right thing, eventually, some 5 minutes, some 5 years, some 5 decades down the line, well, not quite that far, but eventually they slunk back. They may not have agreed with what we were doing, but they became part of the community. Once they're in part of the community, then they start to see what it means to do things righteously. And I think he was really onto something there, not the least because he's got a hell of a successful ministry there. But I think that's the way, I think we can apply that to society as a whole and start building, I suppose the term would be anti-mega churches. But when you go beyond the theory,
that suffers from a problem of that's like kind of the pastor's work. I mean, that's your vocation. If you want to go to doing the right thing and being that reconciliatory, then that's great. That's what your vocation calls you to do. But as for me, I can't speak for Audra and Kate, but I'm assuming it's similar. I can't play with kids' gloves with these people.
Mhm.
And like, I can't even be around them after they go off on these tangents and tirades. So I'm not going to be reconciliatory. It's not in me to do it. I have limited psychological capital and limited resources, and I can't speak for the others in the chat. They can chime in. My social circle's become an echo chamber, more so lately than anything else.
Mhm.
I think there was a great discussion you guys had on a previous episode about the spoons.
Hmm.
How you don't have enough spoons to be the person to explain things. And for, I don't know about for Kate, but for most women, we are out of spoons. We have been for a long time. Like social justice, yeah, a lot of stuff pisses us off. We have to deal with this world. And on top of it, we also have to work. We have to be parents. We have to go to school. We have to take up the household chores. We have to do all of these other things. So at the end of the day, we don't have enough food.
Right.
What would be nice is if, for example, let me give you an example. When a friend of mine got pregnant while she was using birth control, we went to the only, which is now closed, the only abortion clinic provider in our city, and parked in the back, which is a private lot, it's a private property. And there were protesters in the parking lot. And the one leading it was a judge, a retired judge. And I sent her inside and I went right up to him and said, number one, what you're doing is illegal. You're on private property. You should know better. You're a judge. You need to be on the front sidewalk. It's property and you know better. And number two, how do you know just because she's here that is what she is doing? Maybe you need to go back and start resources for people to actually get them, prenatal care that they need or all of these other things. So I went inside and then I realized like his idea of this being wrong was because of his faith and what he has been taught. And it would be nice if we had just as many men on our side out picketing, these people picketing, counter protesting these people. That would be fantastic because it would actually show some sort of representation other than just what you typically see in the media, which is, the angry white feminist all upset that she can't kill her baby.
Yeah.
Like, it would be nice to actually have some support here that, number one, abortion is not just a form of birth control. It's a medical termination that is needed for a lot of different reasons.
Right.
And it's easier to get into a clinic and get it done right away than it is to set it up through a hospital in the United States. That takes weeks.
Yeah.
Like, it would be nice, number one, to just have people that are on our side and actually show up and help protect that type of situation. I think that would be a nice start to this. And also, especially people who are Christian.
So I'm gonna address. I think there were 3 different points in there that I think we should speak to. The first, I will say, well, you're right. The media loves to focus on your angry feminist ideology. There are a bunch of churches, some that I've been affiliated with through my own classes, where you've got guys and others and whole groups of people who are counter protesting. A couple of churches I know that have rapid response teams specifically for that purpose.
That is fantastic.
So that is a thing that's happening. It's a thing that's growing in places. So that's one thing that can be in your region looked out for. But the broader thing I want to speak to is, Steve's question: what do we do as a community, as this community? What can we do? And you bring up the spoons, which I think is an important thing. And what you guys are kind of dancing on here is that you're right. The pastor's job is to basically be a spoon dispensary and spoon assistance provider. So tackling some of these broader reconciliatory issues is largely going to fall on your pastor in that respect. But that doesn't mean that that's the only piece of the engine. as it were. So in a community like this, like, yeah, it's going to fall on me to reach out to the crazies and the weirdos and the right wingers and stuff like that. It's going to largely fall on the pastor. But everybody has a piece that they can contribute, whether it's organizing that sort of a rapid response counter protester team, whether it's participating in an online video like all of you guys are doing right now, whether it's leading up educational offerings. There are a lot of other pieces that are less spoon intensive that someone can contribute to. That's the whole reason why I still think organized religion properly done can still contribute, is because organizing in a structural engine like that way is a way to enact change in the opposite direction as well. Well, that's my theory anyway. Don't all talk at once.
I was going to say a lot of dead air time.
I mean, I feel like I can be beating a dead horse adding more because I'm not a woman in this conversation, but at the same time, sometimes I feel like I don't have the spoons just mentally to deal with this level of nonsense. So I can't imagine what it's like for a woman dealing with it.
Yeah, and this
Can't even begin to imagine.
This is another point that's worth mentioning too.
I only have one spoon. I can't handle much.
Yeah. I think this is another important point though, is spoon management. You know, as men, we also have limited spoons. Everybody does. But we kind of need to save a few spoons for speaking on these particular issues, because we're going to be heard in a way that women aren't. So we have an obligation to spend a couple spoons on that. So that is, I think, a point that's worth considering too, is we kind of have to. That's our, I'd say, a moral obligation is, you know, take a couple of spoons off of some other topic and spend them on this one once in a while.
And I think that's important too, because when it comes to pregnancy, regardless of how that pregnancy happened or how it is going to turn out, men are part of that as well. Like, yeah, your voices do carry more weight. Unfortunately, they do, even though we are over 50% of the population. You know, obviously we're not typically a population minority. There's over 50% of women, and we give birth to all of you. There's this idea that men want to help protect women anyway. So here's a way for us to use our voice to say, here's how you can do it in a way that helps us, instead of being, you know, patronizing or telling us we don't need to worry about it, it'll get better. Or the ACW will fight it and we don't have to worry about it, or it'll get blocked, or stop rationalizing it away or thinking that you're doing that, because to us, it is terrifying. And the reason that I bring that up is because for someone like me who is, I am reproductively challenged, number one. The idea that a spontaneous abortion, aka a miscarriage, has already happened in my life. Like, I found out I was pregnant with my first pregnancy by finding out that I wasn't pregnant. Let me tell you, it still got billed my insurance with the word abortion in it. Spontaneous abortion. That doesn't help anything. It doesn't feel good. And as time progresses in a pregnancy, those people who miscarry at the same rate as the abortion rate. And that's only recorded documentation, which means the people like me, that's not recorded. We never had our first OBGYN appointment. You know what I mean? Like, these are things we get billed for, we have to pay for.
Yeah.
And the laws don't cover us when it comes to abortion either. So all of this stuff, if you want to protect us, write comprehensive laws. Make sure that our legislatures are doing that. And if they're not, call them. You can take 15 minutes out of your lunch break as a man to call your legislator and say, I don't support this. Because it doesn't down the difference between these things. It doesn't do anything for the people who are miscarrying. And let me just drop some more knowledge on you. Fertilized eggs, 75% of them are washed out before they even implant.
Yeah.
That's so it's kind of part of God's plan.
Yeah. It's a built-in redundancy, if you will.
Exactly.
You know,
To punish people.
I'm thinking about what you're saying here, and I'm gonna give you another funny kid story that I think matches well with it, because I communicate as a parent now almost entirely through kid-related anecdotes.
Me too.
I remember not too long ago, I was exhausted and I wasn't feeling good, and my middle child, my son, comes up to me, and they've been working on origami, and he made a little origami boat, and I'm like, oh, that's adorable, thank you, buddy. 5 minutes later, I had a stack of about 20 origami boats that were covering me, and he was just coming back with more. And finally, I had to tell him stop. And he's like, "But I want to help." I was like, "Okay, I appreciate that, and it means a lot to me that you want to help. But if you want to help someone, the first thing you have to do is ask, what do you need? That's the first thing. The second part is you doing a thing, but it's not necessarily going to be the thing that you want to do to help, because otherwise, if you're only doing what you want to do to help someone, you're not helping them, you're helping yourself feel useful."
Exactly. That's the same thing that there's this idea of in psychology what is called a love language. That everybody differently. How we show our love is different.
Yeah.
But so how we receive love may not be the way that we give love.
Yeah.
And so there's very much that aspect. But people in general, especially women, we have been groomed from birth to be accommodating. We don't want to stand up. We don't want to say certain things. We don't want to be the loud one. We don't want to be the mean one. We don't want to be the one that is constantly in your face, because then I don't think we've sworn much in this one, but I'm going to break it here. You don't want to be the fucking bitch. That's it.
Yeah.
You know, you assertive, but you can't be aggressive. And there's a line. And you can do certain things. And so when it comes to us speaking about things that really are about our own bodily autonomy, it's written down as either you're too loud, you're too in your face, you are too this, you're too that, you're too much.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, men have this privilege. They have this privilege that also gives them power.
Yeah. And
They're
as people who have that privilege, we have a responsibility to utilize it in ways that are helpful.
Exactly. And so when I say, like, this is what you can do to help, like, it's not just helping you, it's helping your fellow human, it's helping next generations, it is helping all sorts of people other than just yourself. So yes, unfortunately right now the responsibility does fall on all of us to do something about this.
I kind of always have pondered why it's so hard to appeal to logic and logic some of these bullshit laws away. Like when people come up with the anecdote of let's make it so you have to like go to your doctor and have like 500 appointments before you get a prescription for Viagra, for example, or the extreme anecdote of saying like you have to have your wife's consent to get a vasectomy, things like that. We provide ancillary examples where the onus is put on the men and everyone just act like it's ridiculous. Like, why is it so difficult? Why is an appeal to logic so difficult? Why are people so stupid?
Because these aren't intellectual issues, they're emotional issues. They're all rooted around attempting to enact control. And attempting to enact control is a process by which you take an emotional issue and pretend it's an intellectual issue. And that's ultimately what you're seeing here, is people who are saying this is totally logical to do it this way and not this way, when it's got nothing, it's not logical, it's not intellectual, it's just they want to control and they're repackaging it thus.
Yeah, but then it is an emotional issue, but you still run into this issue of people have obviously shown the other side of the coin. Everyone's like, no, that's ridiculous. But why, like, why is it so hard to see beyond that? Like, I mean, I can see beyond it. Clearly, I'm the one raising the question, so I understand how ridiculous this is.
Because we're tied to our institutions and our structures and traditions. We're tied to the way things have been. We're tied to all of these things by everything ranging from nostalgia to a real emotional connection or to a personal investment in the privileges of the situation. We have emotional and beneficial connections to the systems that are in place, and that makes it very, very difficult to look at anything that would overthrow that.
Absolutely.
It's that emotional connection.
And I do really want to say thank you to Steve for bringing that up, because that is something to me that has always been an issue. For example, a man typically, you know, like if he's extremely horny, could ejaculate up to 9 times a day, which means that he has the potential to impregnate 9 different women per day. Or if you take into account for a year, how many pregnancies could he cause? Whereas a woman can have the same amount of sex, but she can only carry 1 pregnancy, whether that's a single, a twin, a triplet, whatever, but typically a single, 1 pregnancy per year.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, we're kind of focusing on the wrong end here for birth control.
Exactly. And I think now, as we're getting into this discussion of why do people do these things, we're starting to get into the psychology of it. And I think we've set the stage well for the next episode, where we're going to be talking more about some of the psychology and religion intersectionality there. And I think, given time, this has probably been the best place to kind of call things for today. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So
Reasonable. We've been going for probably around an hour total with the break.
we've got that countdown clock running in the corner too. So I want to look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to anybody who's still watching all the way to the end. This has been a fun conversation. If you're still watching, we're going to do another episode next week. We're going to talk more about some of the psychology and religion intersections, like I mentioned earlier. We got a lot of other episodes coming up in weeks to come that I've got more guest stars and a lot more fun conversations. I hope you'll join us for that. In the meantime, if you want to be a part of this community and all of the weird, odd, sweary, geeky, and otherwise interesting stuff we're trying to accomplish here, you can check out our website. Link is in the description for that. We got videos that are coming out on Thursdays, Fridays, and usually Mondays-ish, as well as, and this is the big one, our Discord server, which is where all of our conversation is happening, all of our community is happening. And you can find all of that on our website, and you are welcome to join us and be part of our community. In the meantime, you guys got anything you want to plug before we call it for a day?
Nope.
No.
I'm just going to add that thank you for a more difficult conversation on my end. I've been involved in a few of these episodes, and being uncomfortable from time to time is important. And since being a man, this has been a more difficult conversation, but I think I asked the right questions at the right time due to my interactions with Audra. It's so nice speaking with you.
Exactly. Living in that discomfort is a thing we all have to do. So, all right. Well, thank you. Oh,
I was going to say it was nice speaking to all of you too.
good. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kate, for joining us. It was wonderful to see you for the first time, and Audra. I know we're going to be seeing you back again next week as well. So thank you. And as for everyone who's still watching, thank you for sticking around, and we'll see you all on the next one. Take care.